Hi everyone, my name is Leah Kopke and I'm a 3D motion design freelancer. In each one of these episodes, we go over another 3D modeling tool for Cinema 4D, and today's 3D modeling tool is called Spline. We've been 3D modeling a lot with splines. We've used the spline pen and gone over the hotkeys and settings for that. We've used Edge to spline. We've used the sweep tool in order to sweep splines. And we've really gone in depth of how you can 3D model with a spline, and we'll even go into that more. But I wanted to take a moment to just go through what an empty spline is, and when you have a spline, what are all the settings in it? What are the intermediate points? What are your different spline types? And just really make sure you have that solid foundation for if you're doing any kind of dynamic simulations with splines, if you're 3D modeling with splines, or if you're doing any kind of animation with splines, you need to understand what intermediate points are and how they work in order to have everything run smoothly and to be able to troubleshoot your project. It's very important. So let's jump into Cinema 4D and talk about splines. So here we are inside of Cinema 4D. You can see that I have a ton of splines here, and they're each actually a little bit different. So we're going to go through what these differences are. Now, something I just want you to be aware of is that I did change my points within my file, within my preferences, and you can find your preferences under the edit menu. Under here where it says scheme colors, viewport, I've changed all my points to be this neon yellow color just so that you can see them a little bit more easily as I'm talking about them. By default, your points are going to be black, and this might be hard for you to see. If you want to have an easier time seeing them, you can change them to be neon yellow like me. It's totally up to you. I'll go ahead and close out of this for right now. The first spline that I'll go over is just the simplest one. This is our linear spline. The linear spline has points here, and between each point is a straight line. It's very simple. It's straight. Not too complicated. Our next spline here is the cubic spline and the Akima spline. I like to describe these two together because the differences you see between them help you understand exactly how they work. I'll turn on points. Now you can see the points are all in the same place. These splines are created with points in the exact same place, but they look different. This one is our cubic spline. I've named it up here. Cubic. You'll notice that this one, the curvature moves outwards a little bit more. Inside of Cinema 4D, this is called overshooting. The cubic spline has overshooting, which is what you're seeing here. The Akima spline has no overshooting, so it looks as you see it over here, even though the points are in the same place. Our linear spline has points in the same place as well, but all of these are straight. And now we have two other wonderful spline types over here, and you can adjust your spline type right here from this drop-down menu. That's what we're going through right now. We have the B-spline, and we also have the Bezier spline. Now, both of these are useful, powerful tools. I don't think that one of these splines is better than the other. They're just good for different circumstances. For example, you'll see the Bezier spline used more often in software like Illustrator or in situations like motion design. The B-spline, on the other hand, it's a spline that is created using a lot of accuracy in the sense where it's created with an algorithm that is much easier to use for manufacturing. So the B-spline is very accurate, and it's great for manufacturing. For if you're 3D modeling something for manufacturing, Bezier spline is more commonly used in motion graphics and illustration. It's a great tool. It actually has the most options for drawing a spline in Bezier than any other spline within Cinema 4D. You have a lot of control over the curvature and a lot of control over the shape. For example, if I grab my spline pen tool here, I'll create a new spline here, and you can create a spline that has curves, that has some curves and straight edges. If I just click, you'll see we have points. You have a lot of control. There's a lot of hotkeys for this. I go through the spline pen tool in another episode where you really get to understand how this works in greater depth if you're interested in that. But that's the Bezier spline. Those are all of your spline types. Our next option is actually intermediate points. So I've grouped all of these within a null here. I'll go into model mode up here and click on here to grab the spline. You'll notice that the spline is an adaptive. The default angle is usually about 5, and you can adjust this. What the adaptive spline does is, in between your main points that you drew, that you can see here are yellow, it puts the most points by the points of curvature along the spline. And it calculates that by this angle here. It's easier to see this if I come out of our points mode and I go into model mode. You'll see if I adjust this angle here with points turned on, you don't really see too many changes. If we change back into model mode, you can see changes as I adjust this. And as we decrease this angle, the spline becomes much smoother because we aren't allowing large angles to exist in here. Now, as we increase this, you can see this becomes more and more jagged, but you can also see that the most points are added along these areas of curvature, like here. There's many more points here than along here. We have 1 point right here for this entire area because it has less curvature, but along the more curved areas here, adaptive is adding in more points. Now on to our next spline over here. I'll click here. This is our next spline. We have subdivided. And I'll stay in model mode since it's easier to see the changes we're making in subdivided. And subdivided is very similar to adaptive, but it is relying more on the maximum length that you allow in here to determine where the points are going. So it uses both the angle and the maximum length here. If I increase the angle quite a bit, you'll be able to see the maximum length affecting this more. So first it uses the angle to determine, and then the second factor that it uses is the maximum length. As I increase this with that angle turned up really high, you can see that we are determining the number of points based on the length here. So it's using both of those factors. Our next spline over here is our uniform spline. We have these main points here, and this will uniformly add in our intermediate points along the spline. They will be a consistent distance apart. Right now, we have 86 as our number. If we start decreasing the number of points, you'll be able to see them a little bit more easily, and this will become less detailed. Here you can see that these points are evenly spaced. They aren't based on the length in between each point. They aren't based on the angle. They are even. Now, this can come in handy if you're animating with splines, or if you're cloning something along a spline. You'll probably want to use a uniform spline for something like that. It's also good for dynamic simulations you're using splines for. Just something to keep in mind. Our next spline here is our natural spline. The intermediate points along the natural spline tend to put more points near areas of greater curvature. You have less control over this though, because you cannot use the angle or the maximum length in order to control this. You have less control with the natural spline, but it will automatically try to put more points along areas of greater curvature. I have a very low number here so that you can actually see these intermediate points a little bit better. You can see along this area where there isn't very much curvature, there are fewer points. And along here where there is a greater amount of curvature, there are more points. You get the main idea of how it is placing them. The more you have, the smoother this will look. So I just bumped that up to 97. It looks much smoother. Our last option here is to have no intermediate points, and it will leave you with something that looks very similar to a linear spline. Something else I'd like to go over is what closed spline does. It closes your spline. It'll take your first point and your last point and connect them together so that it's a closed spline. That's one way you can make sure that your splines are closed while you're 3D modeling. Sometimes things won't calculate right if they're open. I think it's good to manually close them though, instead of just using this button here, connecting them with the... It's better to just connect them with the spline pen tool than to use the closed spline, in my opinion. That's something to be aware of in the settings. And something that I'd like to show you for fun is that we have this option here called point indexes. It will tell you what's your first point and number them all the way to your last point. And this might come in helpful. You'll also notice that with your spline, that there's a little bit of a gradation here. If I go into my preferences, let's find our spline colors in here. We have these colors here called spline start and spline end. They will also allow you to see visually where your spline starts and where it ends, and that determines how your model is affected if you're using a sweep or any other generator to create something with the spline. You need to know where it starts and ends. It helps to be able to visualize that with color. You can pick what color your spline is at the start and at the end. If I want to be able to see the start of the spline a lot easier, I could make it this bright pink, and then I could make the end yellow, and it will be very, very easy for me to see that this yellow area is the end of the spline and the pink area is the start of the spline. So that will help you visualize what you're doing. And if you found this tutorial helpful, I hope you did. Please give me a like or subscribe so that you'll be notified when the next tutorial comes out. I come out with another tutorial each week on another 3D modeling tool inside of Cinema 4D, and I appreciate the support. I hope to see you next time on Ambient 3D Animations.